Hello students, I am Dr. Lalatendu Kesharidas, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS IIT Roorkee. Welcome to the second lecture for the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In the last class, we had discussed about what is political sociology, what are its key concerns, what are the key questions, and I had discussed about the Karl Marx and other scholars as to how their ideas about power and politics has influenced this discipline to understand social power as well as its connections with the political power and the intersections between the two. Today, in this lecture, we are going to discuss Karl Marx on power. But Karl Marx's understanding of power is not so simple because he tried to understand power from a historical point of view and from a materialist point of view. So what we are going to do is we'll first have a brief introduction about Karl Marx and then we'll move on to other aspects of his ideas on power and politics. So unlike many other scholars, whether they were sociologists, they were political scientists, or any of the names that I had mentioned in the previous class, Karl Marx happened to be a multi-talented person. He was a philosopher, he was an economist, he was a historian, sociologist, political theorist, journalist, as well as a socialist revolutionary. As a matter of fact, Karl Marx, although we study him in sociology, we study him in political science, we study him in philosophy, as well as we study him in economics, he never ever hold a position in his life because of this socialist revolutionary aspect of his life. He was an activist, so even though he was German, he was forced to leave his native land, then went to Paris and then moved on to London where he stayed till his death. But for the purpose of this course, we are going to understand Marx and his work as a political sociologist. So some of the key texts that Marx wrote throughout his career and which we political sociologists understand as key texts are the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte that happened in France. Second, Communist Manifesto. There is a possibility that many of you have heard the name of this as well as you have heard the name of these two fellows, Karl Marx as well as Friedrich Engels. The third one is that of Grundrisse. So you will be surprised to know that Marx spent almost a decade in different libraries in London, and Grundrisse happens to be a book which was essentially a notebook for him. All the materials that he had collected by going through the history of England, its origin of capitalism, so on and so forth, as well as its social relationships, he noted down in this work. So this work is extraordinarily crucial when you want to understand Marx's work. And Grundrisse became the foundation on which this very famous, very significant and very timely book was published. It was called Das Kapital in German and Capital in the English. So we will not be discussing the books today, but we will be discussing the central ideas that are part of these books. So it was in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte that Marx spoke about a concept called alienation. It was in the book or in the manifesto of the Communist Party in which both Marx as well as Engels first attempted as political activists, as intellectuals, as scholars to speak about the different class divisions that have happened historically, which we'll discuss in a little while. And as I have said about Grundrisse, it became a foundational text for Capital. And Capital is extremely important because Capital is the magnum opus that Marx created. It is one of the most famous books, it's one of the most read books, as well as it is one of the most misunderstood books. The reason of misunderstanding is because only the first volume out of 3 volumes of this magnum opus of Karl Marx appeared during his lifetime. Volume 2 and Volume 3 appeared after his death or posthumous. And the forward as well as interpretation of these 2 books and other texts of Marx was done through the works of or through the writings of Friedrich Engels. So one of the main reasons of misunderstanding was that Friedrich Engels, although he was one of the closest collaborators of Karl Marx, still he understood Marx and his works to be economic determinism. That it's the economy, it's the material conditions which define the society, which defines a civilization, which defines the flow of history, which led to the creation of something called historical materialism. So in later days, other scholars, when they started reading Marx, his original works, both in German as well as translated text, they realized that Marx was much more than just a political economist. He was much more than a functionalist. He was much more than what he was spoken about, or what the Soviet Union spoke about, or what Friedrich Engels spoke about. That is the very reason why Marx is so significant for our understanding in this course. And if you see, there are so many terms and concepts on the screen, and there are 3 terms: the class, oppositions and ideology, that are highlighted and in red here. So like we discussed in the previous class, social power is very significant. Social power brings people together, brings conflictual situations, and that is how the entire society functions. That is how the political sociology wants to understand it. Now we had discussed that power relationships are there between individuals, within a social structure, between kinship groups, classes, the status, rules, values, authority, hierarchies, solidarities, oppositions, ideology, religion, purity and policy. But all of them constitute part of social hierarchies. All of them constitute part of what and how we understand society, how we understand state-society relationships within states as well as within societies, within individuals and within groups. So Marx spoke about groups, and when he spoke about groups, he spoke about groups in terms of class, in terms of oppositions between classes, and in terms of ideological basis of these oppositions. So it's not like the two of us are fighting against each other, or we do not like each other. I do not like your shirt. That's the reason why I'm going to fight with you. You can do so, but here Marx wanted to understand how oppositions happen based on class relationships, and these oppositions are also mediated through ideologies. Without ideology, there cannot be oppositions or our understanding of oppositions at a broader scale. So these are the 4 key contributions of Marx. The first is alienation, historical materialism, class and class domination, and finally primitive accumulation. We will go one by one and see how this entire framework works. So first of all, let us discuss about alienation, which Marx, as I said before, discussed in his book The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, as well as in his the work Das Kapital. Now alienation, according to Marx, is of 4 different kinds: alienation from products, alienation from work, alienation from social life, alienation from oneself, as well as alienation in your own life itself. So these are 4 different types of alienation that Marx is speaking about. So let us go into detail of each one of them. First we will start with alienation from products. Now when you are talking about alienation from products, we have, for example, let us see, there is a man here who happens to be a worker, and he is working on a platform to create certain products, and this product has to be sent to the market. I am writing them in writing market as M, W as worker. So when the item or the product is going to be sent to the market, it is of no use for this worker. Now what he or she is doing is that they are just producing this commodity for somebody else's consumption. They do not have ownership of the product P. They don't even care whether this product is going to house A, house B or house C, or what happens after they consume this product. Is it getting recycled or it is getting dumped somewhere in the river, in the ocean or somewhere else. So in essence, the worker is alienated from the product that he or she is creating primarily because there is no attachment to that, to the product that they are creating. And because there is no attachment to the product they are creating, so there is no attachment towards the work that they are doing. Let us again go back to our example of a factory setting. Let us assume this factory manufactures cars. So if they are manufacturing cars, howsoever we are designing it, this person may or may not be able to afford this car at all. So probably this car costs, let us say 25 lakh. It is a luxury car, and the monthly salary of this worker is 25,000. Do you think he or she can ever afford this car? But for the maintenance of the conveyor belt, the work needs to be done, and this work is time bound. The time boundedness is because this person is part of a bigger chain where there is someone else who is there and there is someone else who is here. All of them controlled by somebody who is sitting here with a panel and through the looking glass can see the entire flow of work. So nowhere in this entirety do we see this worker or this worker getting attached to the work that they are doing. Do you think even this person is attached? The answer is no. This person could be part of management. He could be a boss, or he could be something else, or he could just be another technician who is watching over all this entire flow of work, because this flow of work is happening at the horizontal level, and because this flow of work needs to be taken care of, that is the reason why all of them are part of it, and none of them owns whatever they are creating. Because there is no ownership, so even the work is not interesting for the people who are working there. So this is the second form of alienation that Marx speaks about. The third aspect of alienation is that of social life. This is very interesting because the most of you who are watching this video right now, this lecture right now, are students. And as students, you always understand the beauty of sitting together in a cafeteria with friends and to have the nice cup of teas. But this worker who is working here to create this vehicle doesn't have that aspect of life. But he can look at this and imagine how the life here is. But his work for 15 to 16 hours each day doesn't leave him with enough time to participate here. So because he is all the time producing this commodity for the factory, so his own personal life is non-existent. Because his personal life is non-existent, that's the reason why he's feeling alienated from the social life. And as we all know, we are all social animals. We cannot have a peaceful, fulfilling life without having being part of society. If we keep working all the time, then when are we going to enjoy the fruits of that labor? Or are we only going to work and then pass away rather than enjoying the aspect of it? So this leads me to the fourth aspect of alienation. So as we saw, now this worker, after feeling alienated from products, has got alienated from work and also social life, then what is left? Nothing. All he is going to do is to be buried or cremated, howsoever you want to feel, at the end of his day. Because this worker has been producing so much for the society, for the capitalist, in a capitalist society, that he has no life of his own. He has earned a lot of money, but this money is not leading to anything at all. So this money has no value for him. That is the reason why alienation is very crucial when we want to understand society. And in subsequent classes, we will understand why alienation is not just an abstract concept, or why alienation, the way Marx was trying to understand in the 19th century, is not just in the 19th century, but also in our day-to-day lives. Think of somebody who is working or doing 3 to 4 jobs per day. Do they have any work or any work-life balance? The answer is no. You are producing, but you are not able to consume. Because you are not able to consume, so you do not enjoy the money that you are getting. And many times even the money that one is getting is not decent enough. So then this leads us to understand what Marx would call, both Marx as well as Engels would call, historical materialism. Why historical materialism? Primarily because before Marx, all the scholars in Germany and elsewhere tried to understand the flow of history in the language of mind over matter. I think, therefore I am. It's not that I am, therefore I think. So Marx flipped this entire idea of I think, therefore I am, of Hegel as well as others, and said that I am because I think, I am, that's the reason why I think. Unless and until my bodily conditions, my material conditions are good enough, there is no possibility that I can even think of anything. That is the reason why we call it historical materialism, because it is historical in nature, and this history moves around with the transitions and transformations in material conditions of life. For that reason, he has given us 3 very significant concepts. One is modes of production, second is forces of production, and third is relations of production. Now, when you are talking about modes of production, this is modes of production basically the means forces of production plus relations of production. Forces of production could be human labor, plus it is about instruments, land, electricity, and raw materials. But this labor and or this material and non-material conditions or human labor plus other aspects, according to Marx, cannot function without the relationship between them. It's as simple as our body or I'm standing here primarily because I have the structure or I have a skeletal structure made of bones. But all these bones are connected to each other through ligaments and tissues. So, relations of production are about ligaments and tissues. But unlike a human body where there is no hierarchy, it is not that my body can survive without my heart just because my heart is beneath my head, or the body can survive without a fully functional pair of kidneys. There is no hierarchy between different body parts, but here we are talking about society. So, we are talking about hierarchy, and this hierarchy is related to the relationship between labor and that of the capitalist. The relationship between a slave and the slave owner, the relationship between different other aspects of society, the relationship between our mothers and the entire family. So, this way modes of production, when they get combined, forces of production and relations of production create through which history moves. Without that, without this entire framework, according to Marx, the movement of history will not happen. So, unlike other scholars who did not give much importance to relations of production, to the social labor, to the social relationships that are there within a society, Marx gave the maximum points to this. According to him, without the relations of production, no society can ever work. But how does this relate to the entire scheme of things? It relates to the entire scheme of things because why would a labor work for a capitalist without understanding that a labor when for the same product he is being or she is being paid 25,000 rupees, and when this capitalist sells the same commodity in the market earns 25 crores. Or you have a CEO who is making 10 crores in a year, whereas you are being paid just 25,000 rupees. So, this way what we understand is that relations of production are quite crucial in the way in the way society functions, in the way society creates its own life, and nothing can be possible without an ideological justification, because ideology, this is a word that we keep hearing that you must have used in your lives, in your day-to-day conversations. And ideology is not just what somebody believes in. Rather, it is a set of ideas, beliefs and attitudes consciously or unconsciously held, which reflects or shapes understanding or misconceptions of the social and political world. In other words, it serves to recommend, justify and endorse collective action. So, it is not just idea, rather it is a set of ideas, set of beliefs and attitudes which are consciously or unconsciously held. So, this is not an individual's work. An ideology is not created by an individual. An ideology is that of a society, of a community. And this society and community, they are quite significant primarily because they in turn influence an individual's behavior and his or her social understanding for collective action or for something else. A capitalist is able to endorse whatever he or she is doing primarily because it is mediated through ideology. And as we had discussed in the previous lecture, ideology is always crucial for the running of a particular society, for the running of a particular type of society, which we will understand in some time. But can these ideologies, can the different kinds of alienation or can the idea of historical materialism lead to a transition from one phase of society to another phase without much consideration or without much many hiccups? Marx, as I have been saying, was a complex scholar, and his complexity lies in describing how things work. And his ideas are like an onion. The more you peel, the more the depth you are going to get. And his ideas were also linked to each other in the form of a chain. So now when we have been speaking about historical materialism, ideology, alienation, so on and so forth, he says all of this is fine, but they are all linked to each other through ideology, through material aspects, but he calls them the base superstructure binary. Now, if you have base here and you have ideology on top of it, then this base interacts with this ideology interacts with this base. The first and foremost aspect of historical materialism is that it is the base, which is the modes of production, which influences ideology, and in effect this ideology maintains the base. So, in other words, in base in the modes of production we have different kind of relationships. We have relationships of bourgeoisie and proletariats, we have relationship between men and women, we have relationships which are characterized by class, which are characterized by caste, which are characterized by different other kinds of material conditions. But this cannot be sustained unless and until you have an ideological justification. And this ideological justification could be through something called law, could be through something called media, could be something called politics, or it could be science and education. Each one of them are significant primarily because we are looking at them from those angles, and these ones lead to something called art, family, etc. So, base superstructure binary is what that maintains the entire society and that maintains a justification of that entire society. In subsequent classes, we will discuss how it is done, and we will have very fascinating stories as well as case studies when we discuss some of the issues that are there. So, if this is the scheme, then how does this scheme work? Now, we saw it works through the base superstructure binary, through ideology, through alienation, so on and so forth. But it is also through class relations and class dominations. Marx argues that class and class domination are there primarily through relations of production. And when the class domination happens or class happens, it is not just about your status in market. Rather, it is through your ownership of forces of production, your relations of production, and also your modes of exploitation. Before Marx, nobody spoke about exploitation, nobody spoke about labor and how labor, state, and capitalists they interact with each other. And according to him, they interact with each other through class and class domination. And this domination is justified through the base superstructure binary. So now that we have come across this much, and this is the final grand stage that we are in now, in which we are going to discuss how the movement of history happens, which Marx would argue is an arrow of time. Marx was a modernist, so for him everything moved from point A to point Z, and in between we have different stages. We have stage of communism or primitive communism, we have the stage of slavery, we have the stage of feudalism, we have the stage of capitalism, we have the stage of what? We have the stage of socialism, and then we have the stage of communism. And each one of them are defined by relations, defined by production relations. These production relations create conditions for the movement of this time, and it is also class formations and class contradictions. So, let us discuss about that. So, in this AI generated image, we see the stage of primitive communism. Now, primitive communism, the way the Marx understood, was a stage in which people living in forested communities, they were hunters and gatherers, or they were agriculturists, and there was not enough the food available for them, there is not enough life available for them, there not enough security available for them to live in nuclear families. So, they always lived in this big structured families. But because everybody was doing the same kind of works, they were generalists, so there was no class division and not much of class contradiction. Class contradiction started when this fellow with a spear became more powerful than this fellow who is just carrying wood, or this fellow became far more intelligent than the other two, because he is creating tools, and because he is creating tools, these tools are going to enforce his power over the other three, and this is the kind of internal contradiction that Marx speaks about. And when it happened, these internal contradictions between the chief and others became turned to a point where where there was no return. So it led to something called slavery, because the people who had become more powerful, they started acquiring others as properties. So these fellows were the private property of these two. They are the slaves and these are the slave owners. According to Marx, this is the first step of class formation. And this class formation is very crucial, because unless and until there is class formation, then there will not be class differences and class contradictions. So what we see here is that these two over a period in time got fragmented, and the workers who had been working so hard, they revolted against these fellows. And when they revolted, they created a new system, and that system was called feudalism, in which a new stage of work became, and the social production of relationship became insignificant. Because here you see that again there is a division between the two. Here you have people who are only working, here you have people who are enjoying the fruits of this labor. But the difference between the slavery and this system was that these fellows, they have ownership of whatever you can see in this image. They only have to send these lords or manorial lords a small portion of their labor, or a small portion of the products of their labor. But because of the contradiction that is there, so this is not only this is not only the labor who are working. So for example, this guy is able to produce a lot more and got into business and made a significant amount of money. And because they are making significant amount of money, so they want a say in the way this entire society is being governed. But these fellows don't want that, and because these fellows don't want that, so all these people, all this money, they came together and chopped off the heads of these two individuals. You remember the French Revolution? That is what happened there, which gave rise to something Marx was quite fascinated about, which he called capitalism. Because here now the class differences are as stark as it can get, and these class differences between the capitalist or the bourgeoisie and the labor. This capitalist owns everything that you can see in the background, and this fellow owns only his own body. Even this hammer is owned by this capitalist. For Marx, this is very significant, because here the class contradictions are quite stark. Both of them know their own class positions, both of them know how they are functioning and what they are doing and what they are not doing, and how to fight it out. And when this class contradiction becomes very significant, then something like a revolution happens. And through this revolution, a new form of society emerges, that of socialism, in which now there is a common ownership of property, and the state acts as a guardian of this property. People are living happily because there are no more capitalists. Rather, people can do whatever they want to. Everybody is living happily ever after. But this is not the end of the entire scheme that we discussed about on historical materialism, because there are also the certain contradictions, because the contradiction is now between the state and the population. But according to Marx, this can be taken care of through something called communism, in which this is the ideal state in which everybody is free to do whatever they want to. They are all happy, there is no pressure, it is a classless society. And according to Marx, this is the ideal situation that we can get into. And this could be the end of the entire chain of history in terms of historical materialism, because there is no exploitation now. Because there is no exploitation, so there is no class contradiction. And one final thing that Marx spoke about was primitive accumulation, because here he says any transition that is happening, it is happening because of certain reason. And he gives the example of England, in which capitalism emerged not just because the head of some kings and queens were chopped off. Capitalism emerged primarily because these farmers, these serfs, they were all expropriated from their land, so that some capitalist, with the help of the state, can take away all these sheep and lands from these farmers and grow the wool for the international market, and again make a lot of money. So that was the starting point. That is the reason why he is calling it primitive accumulation, the starting point from where everything started. Now the final question is, so the scholars before Marx, they spoke about that all this transition has been happening, and even people after him argued that all these transitions are happening because of division of labor. Because population is increasing, urbanization is happening, that's the reason why we need more people to different kinds of works, and because they have to do different kinds of works, so division of labor is significant and it is necessary. But Marx disagreed with them, and Marxists disagree with them when they say that it is because of a revolutionary shift in modes of production, because of which all this transition we see in terms of the arrow of time from E to Z, not because of some division of labor. So now this is a question for you, this is a question for us, and in the subsequent classes in this course, we are going to discuss whether it is division of labor or it is revolutionary actions which are leading to a shift from one point to another, or the scheme that we drew in the previous the slides, whether it is a direct flow of time, or we can see that there is still primitive communism which is residing alongside capitalism. You might be aware of the Jarawa tribe of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Think about their life and think about your own life in whatever urban location you are living in, and you might get an answer for this question. So this is a further reading. I would urge that all of you go through this book. It's a very inexpensive book, but at the same time it is one of the most significant books which discusses the works of Marx, Durkheim and Max Weber. Anthony Giddens is one of the key sociologists and political sociologists of our time, so I suggest that you read. But before I wind up the lecture, let me leave you with this question and think for yourself: does development lead to gain for some and dispossession for others? And if that is so, then how it is happening? Is it happening because of the scheme that Marx spoke about, or it is happening irrespective of that? Thank you.